You're almost live. Thank you everyone for joining this morning. You guys have any questions, please post it in the Q&A tab. That way we could look at it and get started. So we are live on Facebook now, and it's super exciting. So for those of you guys on Facebook, please comment where you guys are tuning in from. We're really happy to have you guys this morning, especially morning in California. We have a really special guest today, and I'll let Joanne kind of kick it off.
Yes, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuning in from today. We're so glad you could join us for this virtual AMA with Sahra Nguyen. For those of you who don't know Sahra, she is the founder and CEO of Nguyen Coffee Supply, the first ever Vietnamese-American and women-owned importer, supplier, and roaster of green coffee beans from Vietnam. So on a mission to transform the coffee industry through diversity, inclusion, and transparency, Nguyen Coffee Supply has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, in Vice, New York Magazine, New York Times, Forbes, Fortune, and the list goes on. They source organic, direct trade beans from a 12-hectare, family-owned coffee farm in the highlands of Vietnam, then roast them in Brooklyn, New York. And they launched in 2018, selling whole, fresh roasted beans online. They are a Vietnamese-American company committed to sustainability and healthy communities. And I'm gonna let Sahra properly introduce herself later, but first I'll just take a quick moment to introduce myself, and then I'll let Bryan go too. So with that, my name is Joanne. I am a real estate investor in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was producing YouTube videos for a Fortune 500 company, and Sahra has a background in film too, which is super interesting, but we can get into that in a little bit. But now I just invest in real estate in large apartment buildings outside of California full time. So with that, I'll hand it over to Bryan.
Hey guys, I'm also a real estate investor. I also come from a software engineering background. I'm really happy to have all you guys here this morning too and join us on Asian Hustle Network. We're super excited to hear from Sahra and learn a lot from her too. She's definitely my inspiration. Just reading through her stuff last night and preparing for today. I'm just like, dude, she's a total boss, So we do want to announce a giveaway that Sahra is doing for her Vietnamese coffee. So the giveaway rules are pretty simple. We need you to follow Nguyen Coffee Supply. Maggie will comment the Instagram handle onto our Facebook Live page, and we'll comment that onto our Zoom page as well. Please also follow Asian Hustle Network. We just posted up a picture of Nguyen Coffee Supply coffee sample onto our Instagram page. Please comment underneath, tag 2 friends, and we'll select the winner by Tuesday. So good luck to you guys. We'll pass it back to Sahra for her to give herself a proper introduction.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. If we had a live audience, I'd be like, give it up for Joanne and Bryan. That was beyond a proper introduction. Thank you so much for that insanely kind intro, Joanne. Yeah, I mean, I really have much to add other than the questions that we rolled through. Joanne, you really covered everything. I'll just kind of like throw a few like high level things also within my background that started before Nguyen Coffee Supply, which was launched in 2018. Really before that, I've done everything I worked as a documentary filmmaker for 6 years in New York City. I opened a small fast casual restaurant in Brooklyn, New York during my time here. I've worked in student affairs and youth arts organizations. So really my creative professional trajectory spans a lot of different channels, whether it was performance art, visual art, journalism, filmmaking, and now entrepreneurship and business. And I would say that the most common thread through all of those channels and platforms has really been my passion for increasing representation of our communities and elevating our culture and really taking control of the narratives that are out there about Vietnamese Americans and Asian Americans and really helping to tell more stories. So now I get to channel that passion for representation and visibility and even storytelling about Vietnamese culture beyond coffee through the platform of coffee. Yeah, so that's my brief intro. Also, shout out to the East Coast. I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. I don't know if we have any Bostonians out there, but if you are, drop an emoji. So born and raised Boston, Massachusetts. Both of my parents are from Vietnam. My dad is from Hanoi. My mom is from Quang Ngai. But most of our family's in Nha Trang right now. And they both, like many Vietnamese Americans in this country, were part of the boat people movement where they escaped the country by boat. Separately, of course, because they were North and South. And then both my parents coincidentally ended up in a refugee camp in Hong Kong for a few years. And then they were each sponsored to come to the United States, where they settled in Boston, where I was born and raised with two of my other sisters. I also spent some time on the West Coast. So I also the Bay Area. So I have a really soft spot for Bay Area, LA, in my heart. I graduated from UCLA with a double major in Asian American Studies and World Arts and Cultures. I also spent a semester at UC Berkeley, where I really fell in love with Oakland and the whole Bay Area. So yes, the yay for the Bay, yay area. shout out to Nicholas. All right, so that's my background, and I'm super excited to get into this AMA. I highly encourage everyone joining us. Hit me with your hardest questions. Be specific, because I want to be able to support you and serve you with the limited experience that I have so far. So, no question is like, what's the word? No question is like unlimited. So, yeah.
Awesome, Jan. You want to kick off the first question?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you say with your limited experience, but you've done documentary filmmaking. You even ran a small quick service restaurant, to journalism, to increasing representation. You've touched all these different genres and businesses. So the first question is, if people are in one field and they want to get to another, do you have any advice around that, making that pivot or that switch to something else?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think naturally, now that we're living in this very digital age where there's so many opportunities for self-learning, whether it's through YouTube or through communities, I think people are naturally learning that people are multifaceted and multi-talented and multi-platform. It's very different from this more conventional idea of like you are put into a box and you take one channel, right? Not that there's anything wrong with that, but for people who want to explore multiple platforms, I think this is a great time to do that. So my first piece of advice for that is to never stop being a student, right? And to really put in the work, not just to do the work, but to learn, right? When I first started on my documentary filmmaking career, I had left my full-time job in LA and I moved to New York City because I really wanted to work in film and media. And to be honest, similar to starting Nguyen Coffee Supply, I had zero experience in the film and media industry. I've never worked for a media company. I didn't go to film school. And with that journey, it was just about learning through doing. And I would spend hours on the internet, Googling, YouTubing. I'd find other people who I really admired and respected, and I would just study the shit out of them. I would try to reverse engineer their journey and try to figure out like how they did it. So I think being a student and being really committed to learning is really important. And then as you are learning, just take small steps to apply yourself and try, right? So my very first documentary I made in New York City, it's like, it was kind of bad, it wasn't, it was great. I was proud of it. But I think when you're trying to enter into a new space, you can't feel scared to look stupid or to put out a product that isn't perfect, because it's never about perfection. It's about the process of trying and executing and iterating and reiterating and iterating until your product gets better and also until you get better, right? So that's my first piece of advice on that topic.
Wow, that's really inspirational. I guess for the next question, we want to dive deeper into your experience, especially in Nguyen Coffee Supplies. Because right now we are in a generation where we are owning up to our Asian heritage, and reading through your articles, especially on Vice, hearing your story about you want to reclaim Vietnamese coffee in America. That's awesome. I think a lot of us are starting to feel the same way. It's like we want to own our heritage now. So what was the main driver and inspiration behind Nguyen Coffee Supply, and how did you get started?
Right. That's such a great question, Bryan. Thank you. And before I dive into that, I'm going to take a step back and answer the first part of your question about, this place of being proud of your heritage and also actively reclaiming it, not just through who I am, but also through how I design my business. And I just want to say, for me, like, my journey to developing the pride I have around my culture was really a long lifetime journey, right? Because, and I can relate, and I relate to a lot of people who have shared their stories in the Facebook group, right? Like, growing up, I wasn't proud to be Vietnamese American, like many children of immigrants here. I felt really ashamed, actually, of being Vietnamese American. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, where there weren't a lot of Vietnamese folks. I went to a very diverse public high school. But for me, growing up in the 90s, right, pre-internet, pre-YouTube, pre-Instagram, where I could find reflections of me on the internet, it was a very different time where I felt embarrassed of the food that my mom would pack for me. I felt embarrassed when my parents would show up at school because, you know, they didn't look like the other parents, and they also didn't speak really good English. So, and I also felt embarrassed about their profession. My mom worked in a laundromat. My dad was a house painter. So definitely it was a journey, right? And long story short, all that started changing for me when I discovered activism in high school, and I discovered Asian American history, and I discovered ethnic histories. I discovered, you know, the history of social movements and the Black Power movement. I think understanding this larger context of how race operates in society and how this system oftentimes makes people of color and first generations feel small, that really opened up my eyes. And so from there, it was this journey of self-knowledge and self-discovery. And that was what really helped me develop my voice and my sense of empowerment and confidence, which really continued on to UCLA. And because of that journey, I felt so passionate about understanding our history and our culture that I applied into UCLA as an Asian American Studies major, which doesn't really happen with a lot of incoming freshmen. So now fast forward. So I just want to say that the journey for cultural pride and empowerment, community empowerment, is a lifelong commitment, you know. I'm still deconstructing certain ideas or internalized ideas around racism. But now fast forwarding to, you know, my current venture with Nguyen Coffee Supply, it really started because I felt like Vietnamese coffee was really being mistreated and misrepresented in the greater coffee community. In New York City, I noticed there was this trend of Vietnamese food and culture and Vietnamese coffee. People would throw Vietnamese coffee on their menus, but they weren't doing justice by it because they weren't using Vietnamese coffee beans, right? So that's very problematic because, one, we see companies who want to benefit from the cultural capital of Vietnamese coffee, but don't want to use Vietnamese coffee beans. And the biggest issue there is that Vietnamese producers do not benefit from this transaction, right? And then the more I researched it, I think just like high level facts of Vietnam being the second largest producer of coffee in the world, which basically means Vietnam is a major contributor to coffee experience around the world, yet they don't get that respect and recognition, was an issue for me as someone who's very passionate about representation. And then on top of that, the United States being the #2 producer of Vietnamese coffee in the world also means that so many people have probably touched Vietnamese coffee, but they don't know it because of the lack of transparency, right? Once the beans hit the state, the port, it's no longer Vietnamese coffee beans, it's coffee on the packaging, right? And it just points to this question of why, right? So when we do that, you know, so then the issue of our community, Vietnamese folks, Vietnamese culture, Vietnamese contributions becomes invisibilized. And that was really the biggest motivating factor for me to build this company. It's the sense of like justice and representation, because trust me, it is not an easy industry, and I've never had experience in it. So it's not like I was like, let me just figure out how to do this really hard company because it sounds hard and fun. It was really like, this is messed up and like it needs to change.
Wow, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing that and your whole journey, the way you were describing it. I could totally relate. You know, although I'm not Vietnamese American, my parents came from Taiwan and I'm Taiwanese American. You know, I've always thought about doing business, you know, back in my parents' homeland. I want to spread that culture, right? All things you're talking about. But with working with international, it just brings another level of risk to business, right? What kind of risks did you have to face, working in another country where you weren't born? And obviously, I know you speak Vietnamese really well, but still, you need like lawyers, you need a local, representation, I'm sure, to be able to really do a business that spans borders, crosses borders internationally.
Those are great questions, Joanne. I'm very fortunate to have a lot of extended family in Vietnam still. Like both of my parents are one of 7 to 8 siblings in their family. So very big family. And they were each the only ones to leave the country, right? So I grew up with a very small sense of family in Boston. So I have just so many aunts, uncles, and cousins, and now like cousins of cousins in Vietnam. So my network is very strong in Vietnam. And I would say that I do not feel confident that I would have been able to build this company without the support of my family network in Vietnam, right? So my current producing partner was a connection that I made through my aunt on my dad's side, right? And now, even though I handle all the communication on my own, right, through Vietnamese, I think knowing how to read and write in Vietnamese also helps because, Vietnam, they do business with the outside world, but not as elaborately, and a lot of businesses still only do business in Vietnamese, right? And a lot of my partners actually don't like doing emails. They love to do business over chat, right? So it's just a different culture and way of doing business. Unless you're like a really, really high conglomerate where you just work in global economies, then like I think the system is a little bit more familiar. But if you're working with smaller like business owners, entrepreneurs, the process is very different. So I think having a family network helps a lot. And even now, sometimes like when I run into issues, I have the luxury of hitting up my cousin and be like, hey, I can't get in contact with this person and the time difference is really difficult. Can you give them a call during the business hours and just find out the best way I can communicate with them? Do they prefer Zalo? Do they prefer Viber or WhatsApp or email, right? So I have my cousins doing that stuff for me all the time, and it's very, very helpful. On the legal front, I think on the legal front, that is a little bit more, I think I would say the legal front is actually easier to navigate because it's just a set of laws that you need to learn. So I think if you're doing business internationally, I think the few key components that you would need in place, aside from your point of contact in the country abroad, it's like a customs broker who would know all those laws, potentially a relationship with the FDA, depending on what your product is, and a lawyer. But honestly, my lawyer doesn't necessarily know international law. They know the law that I need to operate here. So international law, I think, falls more in the area of the customs broker. And if there is something beyond the customs broker scope, I would probably seek out an international lawyer for international trade.
Awesome. That was super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have some questions in our Q&A section. So we have a question from John Wong. The question is, when you enter into a new industry / space, what are your suggestions on how to network and get to know the right people?
Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, John. What are your suggestions on how to network and get to the right people? So I would say just research everything you can about the industry you're trying to enter, right? And Google is a very powerful tool. There's so much free information out there. And to be honest, because I'm someone who is a huge advocate of self-teaching and constant learning, and I use Google a lot, and I love reading people's interviews. I love listening to their podcasts. I get a little annoyed when people hit me up for very basic questions that they could find on Google, right? Because the truth is, if you want to build a business, you have to be willing to put in the work to even research on Google. And so I would start by hitting the internet, hitting Google, researching who are the key players in this industry, who are the people who you admire in the industry, and then just let it be a rabbit hole that takes you on a journey. Reach out to the people you can. A lot of times, to be honest, people who are really doing impactful work in the industries you like just might be too busy to respond to every message. I know that I feel that way sometimes. So, but it doesn't hurt to reach out. I do cold emails all the time. I reach out to people on LinkedIn all the time who I don't know, and just keep reaching out until someone does respond to you, right? And then once you're able to make contact, ask them a few really impactful questions so that you're conscious of their time. Don't ask questions that you can find out on Google. And then ask them if they could support you in connecting you to the next person who can help you with XYZ, right? It really is, there really is no secret formula. It really is just a process of finding each puzzle piece as you're building and going along. And like, it's like you have a whole puzzle, right? You don't know how it's gonna look in its own roadmap. Find the next piece that you need, whether it's a contact on LinkedIn, whether it's a contact on Google, and then place it down and then find the next piece. So like break it down step by step.
Yeah, I have to say I did cold email Sarah, and look, she responded. Now we're doing an AMA, so reach out, shoot your shot. Don't be scared.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a part of the AHN group, so that was an easy one. Joanne, that was actually probably more of a warm one.
Another one from our Q&A is from Bao Nguyen. He says, "You're one of the biggest hustlers I know." And that's saying a lot since there's a lot of Asian hustlers out there. How do you juggle so many different hustles, and how do you handle when some of those hustles fail?
I know that there are a lot of Bao Nguyens out there, so I don't want to assume, do I know you, Bao Nguyen? Are you my investor, Bao? A lot of us Bao Nguyens, but that is a great question. So he said yes. Okay, so to be totally honest, and Bao will probably be happy to hear this too. So when I launched Nguyen Coffee Supply, right, I started work on the business in 2016. And then I also kind of it fell on the back burner in 2017, right? But in 16 was when I first visited the farm. In 2017, nothing really happened. 2018, at the very beginning, was when I was like, I'm committing, and now I'm going to build this business. So from 2018 was when, and I literally took notes on my timeline to be like, on April 7th, I made contact with the customs broker. On April this, I made contact with the farmer. Or it takes 3 months to get this. I wanted to see what my progress would look like, right? So I started building it active in 2018, and then I launched the company online as a direct-to-consumer business in November of 18. However, throughout this entire time, I was still full-time freelancing in New York City as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a content creator, and also was still running my restaurant, which I'm no longer a part of, but I was full-time creative freelance, right? And so I was hustling all these different things to support myself. And then for all of 2019, I had a really big moment, and Bao was actually a part of this too. So 2019, this a film project that I worked on with Bao Nguyen, who's the director, called We Gonna Be Alright, came out in 2019. In 2019, I also worked on a short documentary for CRAC, which was a Southeast Asian Resource Action Center. And all this time, I was slowly building the coffee company, but still, I wasn't paying myself, right? Because it just didn't make enough money. So I was still supporting myself with these freelance hustles. And I remember I had a moment where it was the summer of 2019, where my last film contract was ending, right? But NCS, Nguyen Coffee Supply, was also trending upwards and just getting busier, and I was seeing the work that needed to go into it. I had a moment where I was like, I don't know what to do, because do I find a new contract, a freelance contract, so that I can support myself, right? But if I do that, it's gonna take bandwidth and energy away from building this company that I just feel so called to do, right? Or do I say no to all these other freelance opportunities? And at the same time, I was also getting lots of invitations to submit for grants, and I was getting invitations to work on film projects in 2020. And I felt honestly really upset and sad and angry that I was at this crossroads where I felt like I had to choose, where while Nguyen Coffee Supply was taking off, I was getting invitations, opportunities in the film world. And I felt really angry that I felt like I had to choose, because for the first time in my life, I felt that I couldn't do both, right? Yes, pre-Nguyen Coffee Supply, I was juggling many hustles, but you will know if you reach this point, you will know when you can't anymore. And for me, I was seeing that Nguyen Coffee Supply needed all my energy, and to do right by it, I could not continue doing this multi-hustle lifestyle. And also a really big moment as well was at the end of the summer, I was like, either I get another contract for freelance, or I fundraise for Nguyen Coffee Supply so that I could then go full-time into it, right? And I decided to go full-time into Nguyen Coffee Supply, and I fundraised my first round. And I remember I cried at the decision because I kind of felt like I was saying goodbye to my filmmaker's career. And, you know, mind you, my life as an artist and a filmmaker was much longer than my life as a coffee entrepreneur. So I felt like it was such a big part of my identity. I felt upset at myself that I didn't make it big enough in the film world where I could be financially secure and stable to continue building my film career. I felt like I had worked so hard for 6 years in New York City, and I'm getting these invitations now for film. And I was like, why did this happen sooner, right? It was a very emotional time for me. And not that it took away from the joy of building Nguyen Coffee Supply, but that was what was happening behind the scenes. And once you fundraise, you know, it's really not responsible to take on any other freelance gigs, right? Because I took people's money. They're trusting me with their money to build this company. So ever since I fundraised in October 2019, I made a conscious decision to not take any more freelance gigs because I'm now going full-time into the company, and that's where I am. So to answer your question about, I'm no longer hustling many hustles at once. I'm building the company you invested in.
That's a great answer to tell your investor. But yeah, I think the next question that we see is by David Tran. So this one actually relates to me as well, because I'm also a Vietnamese-American and I also have trouble finding my roots. So by David Tran, his question is, what recommendations do you have for Vietnamese-Americans trying to find their roots in Vietnam?
That's a great question, David. I'm sure so many people in the group can also chime in to how they reconnected. The first thing I would say is if you have any family still in Vietnam, highly recommend reconnecting with them, reaching out to them on Facebook, planning a trip, visiting them, staying with them, and asking them to show you more. If you don't have family or I would recommend starting by finding online communities, right, who are in a similar space, whether they're expats, meaning Vietnamese-Americans who have then moved back to Vietnam, or even like Vietnamese Australians or British Vietnamese who have then moved back to Vietnam. I know that there are a lot of online communities, Facebook groups of folks like that. And so I would reconnect with them, ask them like, what was it like for you to reconnect? And if you're living in Vietnam now, like, what's that like? And then maybe go visit them and have them show you around. And the other thing I would recommend is to talk to your parents more, right? And which I know for a lot of Vietnamese Americans, myself included, communication with our parents was not always easy and it wasn't always an option. And even still, it can be hard. I think communicating with my parents has been like, again, a long process. It's been a long work in progress. But I can say confidently from my experience, it gets better. And like our relationship now is really strong. So yes, those are some of my tips for reconnecting.
Yeah,
Awesome tips. Yeah, so Tony asked a question and I kind of want to combine it with another question that I received from Bryan. So Tony's question was, what's the biggest challenge you faced starting your business? But Bryan's was, imagine your younger self walking into a cafe and you ask your present self about pursuing coffee as a career. What advice would you give? So if we can combine the two.
Oh my gosh, wait, okay. Can you repeat the first part and then the second part this time?
The first one's the biggest challenge you faced starting this business.
Okay, yep. And then,
so then like what advice would give your younger self if you had walked into a cafe and then asked your present self what kind of career advice?
Okay, I'm gonna answer the last one without the cafe part because that kind of threw me off. The biggest challenge I've faced, I would say, to be honest, you know, being a first generation is really a gift, I feel, because we are such a unique group of people in this country where we're so close to our cultural roots, right? We have that connection, that collective culture and the connection to family. And we also have the know-how of how to navigate American society and bureaucracies and systems. Many of us are educated or first ones to graduate from college. So I think with that intersection of first generation, it's such a powerful and unique gift because we are able to create things in the world with a very unique vision that no one has ever had before, right? So in addition to that, being the first generation and, not having the intergenerational knowledge or wealth from my family network or from, from my family network, really, I think the biggest challenge is I just don't have a blueprint, right? I don't have a roadmap because one, no one in my family or my community has done this. My parents didn't go to college, they didn't grow up here, but also the vision that I'm building is very uniquely mine. And I'm not saying I'm the first one to have an idea to build a coffee company or even a Vietnamese coffee company. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is my vision is unique to me of building a coffee company in the way that I want to build it. So in that sense, that hasn't been done before to me. So the biggest challenge again is just not having a blueprint. Because when you know how they say like, you got to see it to believe it, right? But sometimes, so you got to see it to believe it. That goes to representation media. You got to see that someone like you can be present to believe that you can be president, right? However, I think on the inverse is also for folks of the first generation who are creating new things in the world, sometimes you got to believe it to see it happen, right? So I think having a really strong sense of belief and a strong vision so that you can execute and make it happen and bring it into reality so that the next generation can see it to believe it is a gift and a challenge. So yeah, so not having a blueprint is a huge challenge. And then even down to like the logistical technical areas of building an international trade business, of importing, exporting logistics, of inventory management, of global supply chain management, of forecasting, of all those things. I've never worked in an industry that did that. And honestly, if I had just maybe worked in that industry for a few years, that I would probably have a little bit more of a blueprint. But in general, the biggest challenge in building this business has been not having a blueprint. So a lot of figuring it out, a lot of taking risks, and then a lot of asking for help. In answer to the next question, the second part of it, what kind of advice would I give my younger self? The advice I would give to my younger self and to anyone is really spend the time to get to know who you are, right? You really spend the time to do the internal work to build your voice, build your sense of identity, build your confidence, build your values, know who you are. Because once you know who you are on the inside, all the work that comes externally, whether it's building a coffee business or making a film, it becomes a little bit easier because you will always have yourself as your compass as you're navigating this like crazy world, right?
Yeah, sounds like you have a really strong sense of self, and that's great. It probably propels you through all of the difficulties and challenges that you faced.
Yeah, and that definitely goes a long way too in anything that you decide to do. You really have to know yourself really well because you are going to hit a lot of bumps. If you're not truthful to who you are, you're going to sort of sweep the problems under the rug and never really solve them.
Yeah, totally.
So definitely. So we are at the halfway point now. And for you guys tuning in at this very moment, just a reminder that we do have a giveaway coming out. Thank you, Sarah. So the rules are, please follow Nguyen Coffee Supply on Instagram, follow Asian Hustle Network on Instagram. We just submitted, we just posted Sarah's coffee image on her Instagram. Please comment underneath 2 friends and we'll select the winner by Tuesday. Thank you, Sarah, for doing that.
Sure.
Yeah, so we will continue with the next AMA question. So we have a question by Hollis. You have built such a strong design and brand identity along with an excellent product. Outside of great coffee, what element of business development on the tech side has demonstrated significant growth for your company?
It's a great question, Hollis. Thank you. Outside of great coffee, what element of business development on the tech, merchandising, or marketing side have you seen significant growth? Such a great question. I would definitely say that over the last 6 months, I've really been investing in more of a 360 digital marketing strategy, which has been really excited and contributed to our growth this year as a company. And it's really helped me see the power and the possibility of one, a D2C business, or two, an e-commerce business, but really the power of the tools of the internet for anyone to be successful, right? And to be honest, before I started Nguyen Coffee Supply, I spent all my time in the creative realm, in the writing realm, in the art realm, in the filmmaking realm. So I really didn't have, a lot of knowledge around technology, around like SEO strategy, around like what is metadata, what is structured data, around like paid media strategy, around algorithms and data, right? I really didn't have knowledge into that, in any of that stuff, but I had to learn. So one of the things I did was I paid for an online course that taught me like the basics on paid media strategy through Facebook and Instagram. And it was super helpful, and I don't manage my own paid media strategy today, but it was so helpful for me to take that course because I was able to build my campaigns for a little bit at a time. But really, I had the language and I had the knowledge to now work with my digital team because I know exactly what they're talking about when they're talking about like a 2-layer sales funnel, right? Or I know what they're talking about when they're talking about retargeting versus like cold, warm lookalikes, right? So again, self-learning and learning. And then, and I think for anyone who, going back to Hollis' question, so really investing in technology, and technology meaning an integrated digital marketing strategy that looks at paid media, organic, social, press, PR, email marketing, and SMS marketing. And all those things really work together. And so I can give you an example. For example, we have a strong PR strategy. And if you Google us, you'll see. But the PR strategy isn't just about brand awareness. It's not just about patting ourselves on the back. With a PR article, it's brand awareness, but then we can then design paid media strategy to retarget people who have been engaged with that article, right? So I think beginning to think about the power of technology and the power of tools that exist on the internet for very advanced and like integrated strategy has been super helpful to helping the company grow this year.
Wow, that's a fantastic answer. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Joanne, do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, for sure. So personally, I'm just curious because I'm kind of getting into a point in my business where I feel like if I hire someone, I can take the business to the next level, right? And I'm wondering what are, complementary strengths and weaknesses is someone that I'm looking for, but how did you hire your first employee and when?
Yeah, great question. So my first full-time salary employee was hired in January this year. I hired him, Travis, after I fundraised in October 2019. So I now had the capital to bring on one person because before that, it was just me and a bunch of volunteers and my partner, Eric, and I wasn't even paying myself, right? So very limited bandwidth, but with a very strong vision. So how did I hire Travis? Well, as you described, Joanne, it was what do I need in this moment right now? Like not just what do I need in 2022, because I know what I need in 2022. I probably need like a global sales strategist, but what do I need in Q4 of 2019 and 2020 to help me get to the next inflection point, right? Help me get to the next growth stage. And that is an operations person, right? Operations who handles production, who oversees production and fulfillment so that I could continue focusing on marketing, digital marketing strategy, biz dev, and fundraising, right? And before I was doing all of it. So that is a piece of tip. That's one advice I would give to people who are starting to make their first hire, even if it's a contractor. It's just focus on getting to that next inflection point, that next growth stage, and what does that person look like? And then as you grow, just reassess what your needs are.
So good, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, so switching over to the Facebook Lives, we do have a couple questions over there. A question by Matthew Lee. Can you tell us a bit about your sales tactics?
My sales tactics. Okay. So currently we are primarily D2C, which is direct to consumer, which basically means e-commerce, right? And then the other channel would be B2B, business to business, which is like wholesale with cafes and restaurants. And then the other channel would be retail strategy, which is more like grocery stores and supermarkets, right? So The B2B channel, to be totally honest, we have not engaged in outbound B2B strategy. We actually get a lot of inbounds, which we're very lucky about. So, but my thinking around that strategy is simply bandwidth, right? With the current bandwidth that I have in one employee and then some part-time people, we don't have the bandwidth to do D2C and B2B very well. And I think one of the challenges that I constantly struggle with as an early stage founder, when there's so much potential and so much opportunity, is you feel like you have to tackle all the opportunities at once because you see the potential there. And I had to really stop myself, because if you try to tackle so many opportunities at once, you'll end up hurting yourself, right? So the B2B is like the next channel that I really will invest in. But for now, I'm allowing the inbounds to come in, and the amount of bandwidth I allocate towards that is strictly towards the inbound. So it's like still entertaining it, but not exhausting my energy there, right? Most of my bandwidth is towards the D2C strategy, because at the end of the day, that is our main business model, staying focused on your core model. And also there's so much low hanging fruit in the D2C space, and there's a lot of strategy that we haven't exhausted yet. So it's really important for me as a founder to continue exhausting or optimizing and maximizing these channels. And then it's kind of like, eventually every channel that I'm taking on right now, whether it's press or whether it's paid media strategy or whether it's, organic, at some point in time, you may exhaust that channel, right? Or you may find that the ROI, the return on investment on that channel, is not as high. And that's when you find a new channel, right? So for example, like my team has suggested several times, like, let's do influencer marketing, right? And for me, we're so small still that I don't want to activate the channel of influencer marketing just yet, because we have so much organic marketing, right? We get a lot of organic user-generated content. Our social media marketing is really strong still. Our PR channel is really strong still. So when any of those channels get exhausted, then I'll be like, okay, let's try a new channel. Let's try influencer marketing, right? Even right now with our press channel, our press game has been super strong. The press has been so kind to us, right? I'm aware that at some point the press may get tired of writing about us and talking about us, right? So when that channel gets exhausted, then we're gonna explore another channel, right? So these are examples of how I'm thinking about our sales strategy, since we aren't doing B2B, so I don't have a sales strategy there. But really my sales strategy is around customer acquisition, since we are D2C. So how do you acquire customers? It's everything I mentioned earlier. It's a very 360 fully integrated digital marketing strategy to acquire a customer, which spans social media, organic content, storytelling, press, email marketing, SMS marketing.
Well, thank you for that, Sarah. You mentioned your PR, and I have to say, I think your PR game is very strong, right? I know that you have been in so many different publications like Wall Street Journal, Vice, New York Times, and you even did a TED Talk too. So I'm wondering, from like a small to medium-sized business or even a startup, how did you go about getting that kind of media coverage?
Mm-hmm. That is a great question. People often remark and comment on our press game and our press strategy. And to be honest, so when we first launched Joanne in 2018, like, we didn't have any money to do any paid media. I didn't start doing paid media until October 2019, right? But really that was just like messing around, like a couple $100s a month. I would say that we didn't really start our paid media strategy until January of 2020. So from all of 2018 and 2019, I didn't have any money to invest in robust digital marketing. So I was like, what is the channel I can take? What is the channel that's closest to my heart? And that is storytelling, right? That's press. Like, press is free. Storytelling is free. And because I didn't have money to do these really fancy, like, experiential marketing campaigns or events, or like, basically, how do you make money or how do you generate buzz and awareness when you don't have money? And for me, and especially as I was coming off of like a lot of filmmaking, it was all about my storytelling. So for the first year, it was all about, I really didn't do any biz dev for the first year, which is why our sales like didn't have like month over month growth. I didn't do any hard sales strategy. It was all about telling our story, defining our brand identity, shaping the narrative, right? And connecting with anyone who could amplify our story, right? Whether that was organic, like fans and friends and family on social, and or writers in the press, right? So that's how we really got ahead in the press, because I focused on press. I focused on the press channel because it was all I could afford. However, at the same time, I also want to say that I'm confident in saying that we also had a very compelling story to share, right? Because you can email and blast press all day, but if what you're offering just doesn't resonate or isn't interesting, you may not want to write about it. And I'll give a really good example. The first round of our press blast, and a shout out to Dan Dow, who has been with me pre-launch as like my press lead, who is also now the founder and creative director of our agency, District 1 agency. Shout out to Dan and D1. When we first launched, right, our first round of press blast was founder focused, business focused, and story focused, and mission focused, right? It was very tight on the lens of founder story and business story. And we actually didn't get very many bites, right? And I remember being really disappointed at, the result. I was like, this is our window of opportunity to like enter the world. Like you only have one chance to like make the launch story, right? And the feedback that we were getting was a lot of people were like, oh, she sounds great. This sounds amazing. This sounds great, but it's just not a good fit right now, right? And so that's the example of how press isn't just about you having a good story or you emailing people. It's the intersection of how your story can resonate with their audience in this moment in time, right? And so the next thing I tried was, I remember I saw a New York Magazine article with a bunch of my friends in it, and the title was "The Next Wave Taiwanese Cuisine" or something like that. And it was like featuring 886 and Whole Foods and Winston, who were like all my friends in New York City. I screenshotted that article. I sent it to my friend Dan. I was like, this is how the press likes to talk about Asian culture in a secular trend, right? I was like, we need to craft a pitch with this headline. So we crafted a pitch called "The Rise of Vietnamese Coffee." And in this pitch, we included other players in the Vietnamese coffee space all over the world. We shouted out Kasama Cafe. We shouted out Cafe Roasters in Philly. We shouted out, people in Paris, Hanoi, Paris, right? So we actually built a story that was larger than ours. And in that bit, and then that's how we got the Wall Street Journal story.
Awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really creative and powerful too. So we do have more questions from Facebook Live. So I see a question from Scott Hong. He says, "Can you share any steps you personally took to overcome the mental hurdle of getting started on your business?" I feel like the toughest sticking point is getting through analysis paralysis. I will spend a lot of time doing research on ideas, but I feel like I don't know enough to pull the trigger and actually get started. Thank you.
That's a great question. Thank you so much for sharing, your challenge. To be honest, for me, because of just everyone's wired differently, right? Everyone's wired differently, emotionally differently, mentally differently, physically differently. I don't get analysis paralysis, so I don't struggle with that challenge. For me, speaking from experience, like my sense of conviction and passion to bring visibility to the Vietnamese community, and my sense of conviction and passion to right this injustice where Vietnamese folks were being invisibilized was so strong that I never hesitated, right? For me, the challenge is more of like, how do I do this? How do I figure out like importing, or like, how do I afford this? It's more technical. And I want to say that a part of this feeling is everyone's wired differently. And I also want to add that I think a part of this feeling just comes from me spending a lot of time in knowing myself and defining my voice and finding my voice, right? However, if I could try to put myself in the shoes of someone who has analysis paralysis, I would just bring it back to the question of how badly do you want it, right? And it's very common and it's natural to have fear. Like I still feel like uncertainty. I don't feel fear as much, but I have felt fear in the past. And I think fear is always a part of the journey. And it's not about finding a path with no fear. It's about how do you build your character and build your tools to work through the fear, right? So for me, it would just go back. I would ask you, and I would ask you to ask yourself, how badly do you want this, right? Like, how badly are you willing to work through the fear, and also gain the tools you need to help process your analysis paralysis, maybe gain the tools you need to work through the self-doubt and like the harsh self-criticism to then get to a place where you can take that next step. You may find that, oh, there were a set of tools that someone shared with you. And I'm talking about mental and like emotional, intellectual tools to help process, to help you get through. Or you may find that maybe you actually don't really want to do this badly enough. Maybe you have a passion for this particular mission, but maybe your channel could look like something else.
No, that's such a good answer. You know, Sarah, so many people I talk to, they say the fear doesn't really go away, but it's like you kind of train yourself to act even in the face of fear, right?
Yes, exactly.
We have another question, and it's around the pandemic. So this one's from Kevin Dow, and he's saying, how has the current global pandemic affected your business, and how do you feel about the negative discourse of Asians in the media due to the pandemic, and in what ways do you think we can change that narrative?
Great question. Thank you, Kevin. You know, fortunately for me, the pandemic hasn't affected like our business too much. There were some delays with shipping things over because, you know, Vietnam did kind of like shut down and they weren't having any flights. They were limiting their flights out, and they were not allowing any flights in. So, you know, I experienced some delays, but nothing that was detrimental to our overall operations. But again, I think the thing about this pandemic is it just shows us that nothing is a guarantee and that anything can happen that could flip our worlds upside down. And I think with that in mind, it's so important to remain agile and flexible and adaptable and to be ready to change with whatever is thrown your way, right? And to the other question, the second part of that question was, what was the second part of the question, Joanne?
About the negative discourse of Asians in the media,
Yeah, I mean, it's beyond the negative discourse. It's the violence that's, you know, been the violence that a lot of Asian folks and Asian American folks have been experiencing due to the negative discourse and due to the negative perceptions that the administration, the president is encouraging and promoting, right? It is, you know, really hurtful and painful to see our community, especially when their elders, like Asian elders, to be attacked. There was a family-owned jewelry store here in New York City that was not only robbed, but the owners, the mom was like brutally beaten. It's tough because the issue is so deeply rooted in systemic racism and just ignorance on all levels. So for me, the way I would first try to think about this question is I try to find the path forward towards growth and progress that does not create harm to others, right? So I'll repeat that one more time. I try to find the path forward towards growth and progress that does not create harm to others, right? And I know that as we are all in different places in our own political journey, in our own political participation, sometimes what we may do or say or act out may feel empowering, but just keep in mind that if it's hurting another individual, if it's shaming them, if it's canceling them, if it's boxing them in, that's not true progress, right? So as we're thinking about solutions, what can we do to move us towards growth and progress that does not create harm to others? That's high level. You know, I think low level is just continue to have conversations with people as much as you can. You know, systems are created by people. If we can shift people's perceptions and attitudes, then we can hope that these shifts in people's attitudes and perceptions will also translate into actions. So if you are engaging with people, whether it's digitally or in person, engage with compassion and patience and empathy. And of course, remember to take care of yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely 100% agree with that answer. It does go a long way in terms of how you express yourself correctly. So we are running short on time. So we have about 4 minutes left. So we do about one or two more questions. So we'll go straight into Facebook Live. So the next question is, how much fundraising have you done and what have you allocated the money towards?
So my last round in October was a very small friends and family round. I raised 200K, and I used that immediately towards paying myself so I could go full time and pay my rent, support myself, and no longer take freelance gigs, right? So I went full time. I also used it towards hiring my first full time in person to support in the operations fulfillment, so I could focus on some of the growth strategies for the company. And I also used a big chunk of it towards inventory, because with the coffee business, it's, our model is very sustainable. But the biggest challenge with consumer product goods is having the cash to get the inventory in large bulk in advance, right? And of course, like once you can hit certain economies of scale, your pricing goes down, your margins go up. And also with coffee is very unique because it's not like I have a shoe company and I can choose to scale up slowly, like 1,000 shoes and then 5,000 shoes and 10,000 shoes, right? It doesn't work that way, because for us, we have to think about what importing looks like. And if you can max out a container, like a 20-foot container, that's how you're gonna achieve economies of scale. And a 20-foot container fits 320 bags of coffee, which is 42,000 pounds of coffee, right? So when I first started, I was importing 1 pallet of coffee at a time. 1 pallet of coffee is 1,320 pounds of coffee. So it was like 1 pallet at a time, and then another pallet, and then it was like 2 pallets, which is extremely expensive, right? So for us to be able to import by container, you just simply need capital to get the inventory. Also, we also get our Pham filters from Vietnam. And again, anything when you're shipping it overseas, the cost of shipping can be very high. So the more you can ship at once, the better it is going to be for you.
Yeah, so a follow-up question to that is, how do you ensure quality inside your product when you order in bulk?
So because we have a direct relationship with our farmer, which means it's direct trade, there's no middleman. I go to Vietnam every year to visit him. We're basically like family now. I go to his farms. I look at his entire process. That's how we ensure quality. And, I think he's a businessman. I'm a business person, woman. Like, we both know that if you don't hold up your end of the deal, we will move on, right? And so for us, it's also about having a conversation. If I see something that I'm unsatisfied with, I let him know and I have a conversation, and then we aim to grow together. And if and this is with any partner that I work with, if they can't meet, our agreed upon expectations of quality, of trust, of integrity, then you have to move on to the next person.
Yeah, I love that answer a lot. Trust is so big in business, and building that relationship too, where you can get to a point where you can be honest with each other. A lot of times people in business are not honest, and they're so professional that you never get to solving any problems. So I really like that you built the culture of trust. But we are at the top of the hour now, so I'll pass it back to Joanne to conclude it. But thank you so much for doing this, by the way. We learned so much from you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank everybody for joining us on Zoom and also on Facebook Live. And thank you so much, Sarah, for taking time out of your Saturday to answer all of these questions. And I just want to remind everybody that Sarah thankfully is giving sponsored a giveaway for this event. So please do check out the AHN Instagram and comment on there if you want to enter. We will be picking a winner on Tuesday.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. And
oh my gosh, yeah, thank you everyone for joining on a Saturday. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.
Shout out to Maggie for moderating the back too.
Yes,
thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, everyone. Bye, Joanne.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Am I logging off?